Chapter 250. Defiant Oath. Sonny stared at the last engraving for a few moments, and then continued walking. The revelations he had uncovered on the walls of the ancient mine gave him a lot to think about. The truth that he had been piecing together for a very long time was finally more complete than fragmented. So something had indeed fallen from the sky and put a start to the eventual destruction of this land. Sonny had suspected that this was the case for a while now, especially after witnessing the colossal impact crater that was situated between the Dark City and the Ashen Barrow. At times, he had been almost ready to believe that it was really the result of the vile thieving bird dropping the Weaver's eye on the mortal realm below, as written in the description of the lineage memory he had consumed. The thieving bird had gone mad after looking at the reflection of the unknown, which was apparently forever frozen in the depths of Weaver's pupil. The madness and corruption that reigned over the forgotten shore were similar enough for him to draw a parallel. However, now he knew that it had been an actual being that had fallen from the skies, wreathed in light and flame. A beautiful figure that emanated brilliant radiance and had 3 eyes on its terrible, perfect face. Sonny didn't know what led the ancient humans to attack it, but they had killed the creature, perhaps managing such a feat only because it was already weakened by its fall from the heavens and the events that had sent it plummeting down. But by doing so, they had unleashed the flood of darkness and caused the destruction of their land. Sonny was under the impression that the annihilation of the ancient civilization had been instantaneous, but as it turned out, humans had continued to fight against the curse for a long time. Generations. Even that's why the founders of the Starlight Legion were described as being born in the all-consuming darkness. He didn't know whether the monsters that came to feast on the human flesh had been contained within the body of the fallen being along with the ocean of darkness, or whether they were all humans corrupted by the curse, with those present at the moment of the creature's death becoming the most terrifying ones. What he did know, however, was that the Starlight Legion had managed to push the monsters back and build an impregnable fortress for the humans under their protection. That fortress would later become the Dark City. And then, the founders of the Legion had achieved something even more inconceivable. They had built the Cyclopean Spire and somehow used it to create an artificial star. Yes, the sun shining above the forgotten shore was not real. It was, in fact, a human creation. Speak about ambition. It was hard not to feel awe after learning that those 7 madmen had actually managed to create a sun. They had made a defiant oath to return light to the cursed land, and gone about it with terrifying resolve and sincerity. The story depicted in the ancient engravings ended with a celebration. The forces of good had vanquished the curse of darkness and brought a new era of light and prosperity to the inhabitants of the ancient city. However, that was not where history ended. Something happened between then and now that had caused the obliteration of the ancient civilization, the corruption of the spire, and the appearance of the Crimson Labyrinth. But what? That was a mystery for another day. Perhaps he would be able to find the answer to it back at the Dark City. What Sonny did note, however, was the difference between the dark reality shown in the engravings and the state the Forgotten Shore was in now. Yes, the ancient murals showed a world completely devoid of light, but it was different from the hell that Sonny and the other members of the cohort knew. The engravings did not show the curse of darkness as a literal sea. With no sun and no sea, there was no cycle of tides that turned the Forgotten Shore into an ocean of black water every night. The Dark Sea had appeared at the same time as the labyrinth then, or at least as the result of the same event. Sonny was sure that the two were connected, but he didn't know what significance that information hid. The other thing he had noted was that, while the other members of the party were initially indifferent to the ancient engravings, at some point that changed. When they had been walking past the mural depicting the radiant being with 3 incandescent eyes, Nephi's had stopped and looked at it for several long moments. Then she turned her head away, lingered for a second, and continued walking. Sonny had not missed that detail. However, he couldn't even begin to guess what it meant. Some time later, they entered a wide circular hall. In the center of it, a dark chasm opened into the depths of the mountains, leading so far down that Sonny couldn't even see its bottom. It looked like the gates of the underworld. Thousands of years ago, there were wooden ladders and platforms leading down the main shaft of the mine, as well as a system of ropes and pulleys to lower the miners and lift containers full of precious ores up. Of course, all of that had rotted and collapsed a long time ago. With a sigh, Sonny glanced at Nephi's and asked, "We are climbing down, aren't we?" Instead of answering, she simply summoned the golden rope and shrugged. He shook his head. "Wait, at least give me some time to scout ahead and see if anything is waiting for us at the bottom of this thing." With that, he sent his shadow down the wall of the endless shaft. The shadow wasn't very ecstatic at the prospect of gliding down into the depths of the scary well, though. Giving Sonny a resentful glare, it sighed and dove down with visible reluctance. A few minutes later, the shadow reached as far down as the range of shadow control allowed. It was still not at the bottom of the mine, but at least there were no primordial horrors in its sight. Sonny summoned the Dark Wing and gave the members of the cohort a nod. "We can proceed. Be ready, though. Who knows what might happen?" Standing on the edge of the bottomless well, Sonny sighed and summoned the prowling thorn. Then he commanded the Dark Wing to come to life and took a step into the emptiness. The dragonfly wings of his enchanted cloak were too fragile to rely on them alone in a situation that posed unknown risks. It was better to have a backup at hand. Softly gliding down, he descended in a straight line for a few moments, then made a turn and glanced at the other members of the party. The golden rope had been thrown into the darkness. Nephi's, Effie, and Castor were already climbing down, while Kai hovered near them, ready to draw his bow should anything attack the cohort. Cassie was by his side, holding the quiet dancer in her hand. The elegant rapier served as her guide as well as support, allowing the blind girl to make better use of the transparent wings. With it, she was able to zip around with considerable speed or stay in one place without any surface beneath her feet. Handy. Just like that, the cohort descended to the bottom of the ancient mine. Sonny was gliding down in a wide spiral, sometimes close enough to the wall of the well to touch it with his hand. He was slightly ahead of the rest of the group. When the distance between them grew too much, he would insert the dagger into a crack in the stone and wait for others, attached to the vertical wall like a strange insect. His shadow moved further and further down, exploring the darkness below. Despite the tension that permeated the air, in the end, nothing had attacked the group of descending humans. They discovered the reason for this unexpected respite at the bottom of the mine. Sonny was the first one to land on solid ground. With other members of the cohort still a few dozen meters away, for some time, he was left in complete darkness. As soon as he took a step, something crunched under his foot. Looking down, Sonny saw a piece of pale bone. A few meters away from him, the remains of a giant skeletal creature lay broken on the ground. It resembled a snake with hundreds of tiny claws growing from its belly and a terrifying, round maw. Glancing up, he judged that the length of the dead abomination was enough to coil around the whole shaft of the mine at least several times. While Sonny was thinking, the other members of the cohort approached the ground. The light of their lantern memories fell on him, then shone further, revealing the remains of the colossal bone worm. Exposed by this light, a nimble shadow glided on the stone and attached itself to Sonny's feet. Nephi's was the first one to jump down. Glancing at the repulsive nightmare creature, she outstretched one hand and asked, "Sonny." He shook his head. "It's dead. Nothing is moving out here." Soon, all of them were on the ground. Gathering around the giant worm, everyone had the same thought. Fighting that thing on the vertical wall of the well would have been a true nightmare. Sonny didn't know how the members of the lost expedition had managed to defeat the terrifying creature, but was thankful to them. He would not have wanted to test the durability of the dark wing if that thing suddenly lunged at him from the dark. There was a disturbing question now in his mind, however. If the cohort of the First Lord was strong and capable enough to slay the stone abomination that used to guard the quarry and the worm that lived in the well of the mine, then what kind of a horror had killed them all in the end? With a dark expression on his face, Sonny turned away from the dead creature and walked into the darkness. Not too far from the corpse of the abominable worm, they stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. A makeshift fire pit was built on the rock floor, with 5 large stones surrounding it for the humans to sit on. A bit further, a low barricade was constructed out of the rubble, protecting the camp from unwelcomed visitors. The lost expedition had definitely been here. Since they had been walking, climbing and running for the better half of the day, the cohort decided to settle for the night and continue the search tomorrow. Soon, the orange glow of a bonfire chased away the darkness. It was a bit strange to relax and cook food in the same place where the First Lord and his companions had rested and prepared theirs all those years ago. Sonny felt as though he was touching history, or rather making it. However, he didn't have too much time for empty thoughts. If what Nephis had told him at the start of this expedition was true, tomorrow was going to be his time to shine. The next day, the cohort ventured further into the tunnels of the ancient mine. No one could tell how deep underground they were exactly, but the feeling of countless tons of stone looming over their heads, ready to come crashing down and bury them under their terrible weight, was not a pleasant one. They were in the belly of the mountains now. After several hours of walking through narrow tunnels, Sonny suddenly felt a soft breeze touch his cheeks. A few minutes later, a distant rustle reached his ears. The deeper they went into the darkness, the louder that rustle became, until finally turning into an easily discernible murmur of running water. Soon they reached the dark shore of a wide underground river. The running water was black as ink, but not in the way that the waves of the cursed sea had been. There was no smell of salt in the air, too. Wisps of mist were rising above the surface of the subterranean river, swirling in the silent darkness. It looked like a boundary of the underworld. There was a stone pillar built on the shore, and tied to it, a beautiful boat made of pale wood swayed gently on the cold black surface of the dark river. Looking at the graceful boat, Sonny sighed. It was time to earn his keep. This was the last secret about the fate of the lost expedition that Cassie had gleaned from her visions. But even then, the knowledge she had received was fragmented and incomplete. All she could tell the members of the cohort was that, once they crossed the dark river and until reaching the next boundary, they had to keep their eyes closed at all cost, no matter what happened. No living thing could see what lay beyond these cold waters and remain whole. At least that was what she told them. Cassie didn't really know herself what would happen if someone failed to follow that rule, but said that she had never felt more terror than in the short moment before the vision showing her the fate of the lost expedition had shattered, and everything had grown dark. This was telling a lot, considering what kinds of horrors the blind girl saw in her vision routinely. In any case, this was where Sonny came in. While looking through the eyes of the shadow was still too dangerous, he could lead the cohort to their destination with the help of his ability to sense space through the shapes of shadows populating it. At least in theory. Standing on the shore of the dark river, 6 humans tied the golden rope around their waists. When everyone was ready, Nephis took out 6 strips of cloth and a block of wax. Lighting a small white flame on her palm, she sighed and turned to Effie. "You're first." The huntress made a complicated face, but then obediently approached their leader. What followed next looked simultaneously intimate and disturbing. Using her flames to melt the wax, Changing Star gently took Effie's face in her hands, and after the huntress shut her eyes tightly, sealed them with melted wax. Then, she tied the strip of cloth around Effie's head to hold it in place. One after another, every member of the cohort went through the same procedure. When Sonny's turn came, he shifted slightly when Neff's cool hands touched his cheeks. A few moments later, he was blind. That is this how Cassie lives? Commanding his shadow to not see anything, Sonny was left in utter darkness. However, he still had it better than the blind girl. His shadow sense was still working at least. With its help, Sonny could more or less tell what was where. This form of perception was vastly different from sight, but could serve the same purpose in a pinch, be it very poorly, if conditions were right. Luckily, he had practiced navigating the world with the help of nothing else but shadow sense in the past. This was how he had defeated the strange basilisk creature in the Dark City, among other things. Leading the group of staggering humans to the graceful boat, he helped them to board it and untied the rope holding it in place. Then, Sonny found the oar and pulled on it, propelling the boat across the dark river. Soon, cold mist shrouded everything around. The deeper into the mist they sailed, the more it felt like they were leaving one world behind and entering another. A much darker, much more ancient, much more terrifying world. No one felt compelled to speak, so the silence was broken only by the murmur of rushing water and the creaking of the wooden oar. This is not too bad, yeah, I'm not scared witless at all. Calming himself down with these silly thoughts, Sonny continued to guide the boat. However, one thing kept making him shiver. Being surrounded by mist and having to keep his eyes closed, Sonny couldn't help but remember the harrowing encounter with the being that appeared in a veil of fog and tried, and lure him into gazing at it using a stolen voice. Was this where it came from? After some time had passed, he couldn't tell how much no matter how hard he tried, Sonny suddenly sensed a solid mass in the distance. This was the opposite shore of the dark river. Soon they were drawing near to it. As the bottom of the boat scraped against stone, Sonny jumped to the pier and tied the rope around the stone pillar. Then he helped the others disembark. Turning his head, he sensed another shape swaying on the surface of the water. There was a second boat here, presumably the one First Lord and his companions used to cross. But unlike Nephi's and her cohort, there had not been an oracle in their ranks. No one had warned them to keep their eyes shut. Maybe this was the reason why none of them had returned. Turning his back to the river with a strong feeling of unease, Sonny faced the mouth of the tunnel that led deeper underground. Letting out a resentful sigh, he slightly tugged on the golden rope and took a step forward. The other members of the cohort had no choice but to follow him. A few seconds later, they disappeared into the tunnel, leaving the shore of the silent river behind. As soon as Sonny stepped into the tunnel, he felt cold shivers running down his spine. Although he couldn't see anything about it, he could tell that it was different from the ones they had traversed earlier. This one still felt like it had been cut through the flesh of the mountains by someone or something, as opposed to being formed by a natural process. However, its creators were unmistakably different from the humans that had created the mine and the quarry outside. Everything about it was more pronounced, more skillful. The shadows populating the tunnel were different too. They were much deeper, much darker, and much, much more ancient. Soon the tunnel turned into a maze of wide passages, all filled with nothing but mist and silence. Another maze. Of course it's a maze. Everything in this damn place just has to be a maze. Before Sonny could finish the thought, though, he suddenly froze, paralyzed by fear. Because right in front of them, he felt the presence of a shadow that was different from all the others. A human shadow, The human shadow stood lonesomely in the mist, strangely aloof and motionless. As Sonny pulled on the golden rope to command his companions to stop, it shifted slightly and turned away, then became still once again. Sonny sensed a cold, dreadful feeling settle in his heart. The possibility of encountering another human in this dark and terrifying place was already unsettling enough. He did not consider even for a second that one of the members of the lost expedition could have survived down here, in the darkness, for all these years. Not unless they were no longer human. But even that was not the cause for the coldness and dread he felt. The real reason had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with his unique aspect. Because of it, Sonny sensed that there was something terribly, utterly wrong with the shadow. The feeling he got from it was one of eerie and utter wrongness. However, it didn't seem to be dangerous or hostile. Instead, it felt lost, empty, and mournful. The shadow was full of sorrow and anguish that he could not describe with words. Sonny was not that empathetic when it came to humans, but strangely, he couldn't help but share in the suffering of this lonely shadow. Maybe because, in a sense, they were kin. As he was observing the shadow, unsure what to do, it made a few steps in a random direction and then stopped hesitantly, lingering there without moving. Then, it walked back and froze once again. It was as though the shadow was lost. A few moments later, Sonny finally understood the nature of the deep feeling of wrongness he felt in the lonesome shadow. When he did, a cold shiver ran through his entire body. The reason why this shadow was so strange and eerie was because it wasn't connected to anyone. There was no human casting it, not anymore at least. The human that the shadow had once belonged to was gone, cut from existence by some unknown power. Sonny couldn't sense any bones anywhere either. It was as if the human had not been killed but simply erased, while the shadow remained to wander aimlessly in the mist for all eternity. What a terrible fate! But the question remained, what was he supposed to do now? The shadow was in his way. Sonny had to either walk past it or return back and try to find another way through the maze. But what threat could this pitiful thing pose? It was just a shadow after all. His own couldn't harm a fly no matter how hard it tried. This one had to be the same. With a deep sigh, Sonny slowly walked forward. With each step he took, he could sense the lonesome shadow better. At some point it sensed him too. Turning to face Sonny, the shadow hesitated for a few moments, then tentatively glided closer. He could feel an outburst of muted emotions radiating from it: surprise, hope, and then sudden despair. Realizing that he wasn't its long-lost master, the shadow froze. Its shoulders dropped. Sensing the deep well of loneliness, anguish, and sorrow in front of him, Sonny tilted his head to the side. Then, following an impulse, he outstretched his hand to the shadow. "Here, take my hand. You don't have to be alone anymore." The shadow trembled, as if it heard his silent invitation. Then, it lingered for a few moments and approached him with uncertainty. Finally, it raised its hand and tentatively placed it in the hand of his own shadow. A moment later, it disappeared. Sonny sighed. "Your shadow grows stronger." Diving into the soul sea, he walked along the rows of silent shadows standing on the surface of the tranquil water. And there, just as he had expected, he saw a new one. A shadow of a graceful young woman was standing among them, as motionless and still as the rest of them. Her anguish, sorrow, and loneliness were gone. The shadow seemed to finally be at peace. Sonny looked at her for a few moments, his heart heavy. Finally, he said, "Welcome, rest now. Your nightmare is over." With that, he left the silent sea and sighed again. Standing in the darkness with his eyes sealed shut, Sonny remained motionless for some time. Then he pulled on the golden rope and led the cohort further into the mist. Sonny didn't know how long they wandered around the dark maze. More than once, he had ended up at a dead end and had to search for another path. It was hard to not lose track of all the turns of the twisting tunnels, but he had somehow managed to stay on track. On the way, he had found 3 more shadows. Each of them was just like the first one, lost and lonesome. And just like the first one, they eventually took his hand and were absorbed into his soul sea. The 4 of them, 1 young woman and 3 men, now stood silently together, united once again even though their masters were long gone. Seeing them together gave Sunny a little solace, no matter how misguided it was. There were 5 stones arranged around the fire at the campsite left behind by the lost expedition, hinting that 5 people had descended into the ancient mine. 4 of them had eventually perished in this eerie, dark place. But no matter how hard Sunny searched, he couldn't find the 5th shadow. The first Lord himself was not here. Could it be that he had somehow managed to survive and leave the maze of mist? At some point, Sunny felt someone pull on the golden rope. Turning around, he walked a few steps back and stopped near Cassie. Feeling his approach, the blind girl raised her hand and pointed at one of the tunnels. Understanding what she wanted to say, Sunny led the cohort in that direction. Soon, the sound of rushing water reached his ears. Some time later, they came to the shore of another subterranean river. They had reached the second boundary. For a moment, Sunny was afraid that they had been walking in circles all this time and now returned exactly to where they had started. But then, he calmed himself down and noted that this river, while as eerie as the one they had crossed on a wooden boat, was rather different. He couldn't exactly explain it, but it didn't feel the same. Plus, there was no pier with 2 boats tied to stone pillars anywhere in sight or rather sense. Instead, there was a bridge. Sunny could feel its shadow falling on the cold water, solid and firm as the stone it was built from. The bridge arched over the river, leading far into the distance. Not wishing to spend another minute in the terrible maze that no living thing could see if it hoped to remain alive, Sunny led the cohort toward the bridge. If Cassie was correct, they would be safe after crossing the second river. Sunny surely hoped that it was true, because the long journey where he had to play the role of a guide for 5 blind people had been nothing short of exhausting. After spending 7, or was it 8 by now, months on the forgotten shore, Sunny had thought that he possessed a high tolerance for terror, but this last ordeal tested the limits of his mental endurance. Walking through that dark place with his sight taken away. It was a miracle that Cassie had somehow managed to remain sane at all. He tensed up when they entered the bridge, expecting for something dreadful to happen at the last moment. But the silence was not broken by anything except for the sound of rushing water, their steps, and laborious breathing. The cohort walked on the bridge, leaving the dark maze behind. Soon, they could feel the mist surrounding them grow thinner. And at some point it was gone. They crossed the river without any trouble and returned to solid ground again. Making several more steps, Sunny stopped and finally allowed himself to tremble. Then, he opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, "Are we through?" Although Cassie had not said anything about the need to remain quiet, each of them subconsciously avoided speaking ever since entering the mist. Because of that, the sound of his own voice startled Sunny a little. A few moments later, Cassie answered in a hesitant tone, I think so." Without wasting any more time, Sunny untied the cloth that covered his eyes and removed the wax from them. Then, he carefully opened them and looked around. They were standing on a stone shore inside a vast cave, through which the underground river was flowing unobstructed. Some distance away from them, the wall of the cave came down, with a mouth of a wide tunnel visible in it. By his side, other members of the cohort were removing the strips of cloth. Sunny could hear the sighs of relief coming from them. However, his attention was instantly drawn to Nephi's, who had already opened her calm gray eyes and was looking at something behind him. Turning around, Sunny followed her gaze and froze. Just a few meters away from them on the shore of the dark river, he saw a human skeleton. It was sitting on the cold stones, its back straight, facing the water. Unlike the ferocious undead from the catacombs of the Dark City, this one was tranquil and untouched by the corruption of the forgotten shore. This was the place where the first lord of the Bright Castle had died. The young man whom the members of the cohort only knew by his title had died on the shores of the cold underground river, just a few meters away from the bridge that he had used to escape the terrible place which, according to Cassie, no living being should have been able to escape. Somehow he had survived even without knowing that anyone entering the mist had to keep their eyes closed at all times. But in the end, the wounds he had received there, or somewhere up ahead perhaps, turned out to be too grievous. Before the last vestiges of life abandoned him, the young man, the first lord who had wrestled the Bright Castle from the nightmare creatures, created a safe place for the humans sent to the forgotten shore to live, and lead an expedition to find a way out of this cursed place, sat down and looked in the direction of the misty, dark maze. The place where his friends and companions had died, leaving him alone in the darkness of this forsaken underworld. Looking at the skeleton that sat quietly on the shore of the river, Sonny couldn't help but feel a deep feeling of awe and sorrow. He had never met this young man, but somehow, it felt as though they knew each other very well. Everything that humans had on the forgotten shore was thanks to his bravery, power, and skill. What a shame that he had died here, in this lonesome place, with no one to share his last moments and tell the tale of his last deeds. The skeleton was strangely well preserved. It was sitting with its legs crossed, back straight, its hands resting on the hips, as if meditating. The skull of the First Lord gazed at the river with the dark cams of its empty eyes, strangely calm and at peace. What Sonny noticed, though, was not the whiteness of the bone, nor the eternal grin of the bare skull, but a thin strip of light metal resting on it like a humble crown. There was a single bright gemstone on the metal band, placed right above the middle of the skull's forehead. After the 6 of them gathered around the remains of the First Lord, and stood there for a while in silence to express their respect for this extraordinary human, Nephi sighed and approached the skeleton. Gently, she took the strip of metal and removed it from the First Lord's head. A moment later, the band suddenly broke into countless sparks of light, which then disappeared, absorbed into her soul core. Sonny's eyes widened. The crown of the First Lord was a memory. As the last spark of light disappeared, Nephi's tilted her head to the side and remained silent for a few moments. Then she lowered her gaze and said, addressing the First Lord, "Thank you." She hesitated, as though wishing to say more, but eventually just took a step back. Kai, however, wasn't that reserved. Bowing deeply, he remained with his head down for a while, then straightened his back, looked at the skeleton, and voiced something that a few of them must have been thinking. "Thank you, we will finish what you started." His words echoed above the cold water, eventually disappearing into the darkness. A heavy silence settled above the shore of the underground river. A few seconds later, the charming archer turned to the rest of them and asked with uncertainty, "I think, should we bury him?" The members of the cohort looked at each other. Before anyone could voice their opinion, though, Sonny suddenly spoke. "No, just leave him as he is. He wanted to be closer to his friends when he died, so just don't touch him." With that, he turned his head and looked away. Since the First Lord died outside of the terrible maze, his shadow was gone too. Now it was just dumb and empty, like most shadows cast by inanimate objects. He had not shared in the harrowing fate of his companions, which meant that Sonny couldn't help him reunite with them, even slightly. Neither could they bring the remains of the First Lord back outside, to bury him near the girl who had died in the quarry. It was better to just leave him be. Forget about it, think of something else. Sonny had other matters to consider anyway. That strange memory that Nephi's had absorbed. He had never even heard of a memory that could exist outside of someone's soul. Had the First Lord somehow relinquished the ownership of it, or was this a quality that all shard memories possessed? And it was, without a doubt, another shard memory, just like Effie's spear and his own stalwart blade. That memory was the reason why Changing Star had ventured on this expedition, to begin with. The thing that was supposed to somehow give her a chance of defeating Gunlog. Sonny stared at Nephi's, then said, "That headband, what is it called? No, actually, let me guess. Dawn Shard, Dusk Shard." Neph looked at him and didn't answer. Her ivory face was calm and inexorable. Sonny grinned. "Full of secrets, are we?" A hint of some deep, sharp emotion appeared in her cold gray eyes. A few moments later, she said, "Weren't you the one who made it clear that you don't want to be a true member of this cohort? You chose to be a hired blade yourself, did you not? Why should I share my secrets with you?" Sonny remained silent for a bit, then sighed. "Well, fair enough. I did, and you have no good reason to share anything with me." Suddenly, Nephi smiled. "You can change your mind, you know. If you do, I'll naturally tell you everything." He stared at her for a while, then shook his head. "No, no need. Answer me one question, though. How exactly is that thing supposed to help us defeat Gunlog?" Changing Star lingered for a bit, then simply shrugged. "See for yourself." A moment later, the headband left behind by the First Lord weaved itself from sparks of light on her forehead. The bright gemstone in its center softly gleamed. And then, something about the world around Sonny changed. What? He blinked a couple of times, then slowly lowered his gaze and looked at the fabric of the puppeteer's shroud. Or rather, on the spell weave beneath it. What he saw left Sonny breathless. The 5 glowing embers that served as nexuses for the complicated pattern of ethereal strings, permeating the memory, suddenly shone brighter. Much, much brighter. In fact, their radiance was now almost as intense as of those inside the black onyx armor he had purchased at the memory market. Which was an ascended memory. What the hell? Pulling on the thread tied around his neck, Sonny fished out the blood blossom from under his armor and stared at it, perplexed. The 2 embers inside the intricate pendant had become much brighter, too. Not knowing that Sonny had the ability to peer into the inner weave of memories, Nephi's explained. The Dawn Shard possesses a single, but also singularly powerful enchantment. It empowers all memories around it. The area of effect of the enchantment is very large, but the enhancement it provides is ever larger. You don't say. Staring at his memories, Sonny felt as though he was on the verge of being dumbstruck. Singular was the right word to describe the effect of the Dawn Shard. He had never heard of a memory being capable of rising the power of another one by almost an entire rank. Wait, did she say all memories? All memories, all of them, in a very large radius. Impossible. With that crown on her head, Nephi's would not only be able to stand a chance in a fight against Gunlog, but also make each one of her followers so much more dangerous. She would become a perfect general for a small army of awakened. But wasn't there something wrong with that statement? Sonny frowned. All memories, hold on, all. Glancing at Changing Star, he asked. So that thing makes every memory around you vastly more powerful. Nephi's gave him a silent nod. Sonny's frown deepened. Then do you not see a problem here? Won't it enhance that damn golden armor of Gunlog's too? How exactly does it give you a chance against him then? She lingered for a few moments, then smiled slightly. It would not, would it? But hey, do you want me to tell you another secret? Sonny glared at her without saying anything. He knew better than to get himself into such a clumsy trap. Only, as it turned out, there was no trap. Nephi's just waited for a bit and continued. It will help me because the golden armor Gunnalug wears is not a memory." Before he could say anything, she added, "In fact, it is an echo." Sunny was silent for a while. An echo. That weird golden armor was actually a copy of some strange, corrupted nightmare creature. What kind of creature took the shape of an armor? But then again, the fact that it looked like an armor didn't mean that it was all it could look like. The main trait of the golden armor was that it seemed to be made out of liquid metal. That metal always flowed and moved around, enveloping Gunlog's body like a second layer of skin. The only thing that never changed was the mirror-like surface that served him as a face. It wasn't impossible to imagine that the mass of living metal was, in fact, not a memory but a bizarre echo. Not impossible, but a bit of a stretch. Glancing at Nephi, Sunny asked, "How do you even know this?" She hesitated for a few moments, then said, "You already know that we have an ally inside the castle. She was the one who told us." That mysterious spy again. Sunny became even more convinced that this person was of a very high rank among the Bright Lord's servants. Only someone extremely close to him would know such an important secret. In fact, Sunny expected that the paranoid tyrant would never let anyone learn of it. Why would one of Gunlog's most loyal minions help his enemy? Was it all an elaborate trap orchestrated by the Bright Lord himself? Looking at Changing Star with a deep scowl on his face, he asked, "Can this ally of yours even be trusted?" If he was right in his guess about the identity of the spy, well, things would become complicated. She was silent for a while, then said evenly, "Trusted? Not really, never actually. However, we can trust in the information that was provided to us." He raised his eyebrows. "And why is that?" Nephi shrugged and then answered, her voice indifferent. "Because I am the only chance anyone here has of ever getting out of this cursed place, and Gunlog is not." Interesting. So, one of the top ranks of the Bright Lord's forces was an opportunist who desired to return to the real world desperately enough to risk betraying the ruthless tyrant. That person had been loyal to Gunlog, because there was no better alternative, but then changed sides once the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan appeared like a miracle and promised to save the people of the Forgotten Shore. That ally of hers was either swayed by Neph's rhetoric like the rest of the unfortunate fools in the Dark City, or was confident of ending up among the few lucky people who would actually have the chance of surviving what was about to come, or just knew something that Sunny did not. In any case, Changing Star seemed to be confident in the information the spy provided, so he did not see the point of doubting it. She wasn't any more naive or trusting than he was, after all. Nephi's had learned the art of cynicism from the best. Kai, who had been listening to their conversation with a fair bit of curiosity, suddenly cleared his throat. I am very sorry to interrupt you guys, but I just wanted to ask, since we have found the remains of the First Lord and came into possession of this memory you were discussing, does that mean that the expedition is over? Have we actually accomplished our goal, really?" That indeed would seem to be the case. However, Sunny knew better. With a friendly smile, he shook his head. "No, no, buddy, the goal of this expedition has not been achieved yet." The charming archer looked at him with surprise. "But didn't we get the thing that will help us defeat Gunlog?" Nephi's was staring at Sunny too, a subtle smile on her lips. "Yeah, Sunny, what else do we have to do? Do tell." He grinned. "Well, it's very simple, really. Yes, you told us that the reason for this adventure of ours was to find the means of overthrowing the Bright Lord, and it certainly was a reason. But it's not the whole reason, is it?" Cassie turned her head slightly to listen to him and sighed. Castor's face, meanwhile, had turned grim. Effie didn't seem to care one way or another. Nephi's, on the other hand, just smiled wider. "What is the whole reason, then?" Sunny gestured at the mouth of the tunnel in front of them. To finish what the First Lord had started, of course. Kai was looking between him and Changing Star, unsure of what was going on. What do you mean, exactly? Sunny shrugged. Think about it, Kai. We saw the same map. What were the symbols drawn at the very edge of it, near the place where the First Lord's expedition had disappeared? The charming archer frowned. There were 3 of them, a crown, a question mark, and a red cross. Sunny smiled. Exactly. There were 6 crosses drawn on the map, each marking one of the headless statues, 2 to the east of the Dark City, 1 to the north, 1 to the west, and 2 to the south. We had visited one of the 2 statues situated to the south already. That's where the spider matriarch had weaved her nest. He turned to Nephi's and said, his smile gone. So the truth of it all is that the First Lord never really intended to find a way through the Hollow Mountains, isn't it? He wasn't a fool who would do something so misguided. No, he came to this God-forsaken place for the same reason that we are here, to find the last statue. Changing Star was silent for a bit. When the silence was on the verge of growing uncomfortable, she suddenly said, "That is correct." Kai stared at her in astonishment. "But why? No, wait. What's so important about that statue?" Nephi sighed. "This is something that people can only volunteer to do. Anyone who doesn't wish to proceed can stay behind and avoid risking their lives in the battle. In fact, some of us probably should." She turned to face the tunnel, remained silent for a bit, and then said, "Yes, somewhere up ahead lies another ancient statue. There will be a powerful creature guarding it. I don't know what that guardian is exactly, but we have to kill it. Anyone who is willing to fight can join me. Others can stay back and wait for my return." She glanced at the members of the cohort and added, "However, if you do join me, you'll have to follow one simple rule. No matter what happens, it's imperative that you don't deliver the final blow to the creature, unless you have reached and touched the statue first. So that is how it works." Initially, Sunny had suspected that the mysterious shard memories were just rewarded to those who managed to slay certain powerful nightmare creatures who dwelled close to the headless statues. The truth, however, turned out to be more complicated. The creature itself, most likely, did not even matter. It was the act of vanquishing a powerful foe after coming in contact with a statue that summoned the memory from oblivion. That was why they had received the Midnight Shard before even learning about how important these ancient monuments were. Sunny, Nephi's and Cassie had taken shelter atop the statue of the ancient knight and killed the carapace demon long after. But no, that didn't make a lot of sense. If this was true, Sunny would have received another shard memory after defeating the Corpse Eater. So, not any powerful abomination would do. Each statue seemed to have a nightmare champion tied to it by some invisible bond. The carapace demon, whom the creatures described as cursed soldiers of the fallen legion used to obey, was connected to the statue of the knight. The iron matriarch was tied to the statue of the hunter. Which statue had the dawn shard come from? The builder, whose monument had somehow come to life and was now wandering the forgotten shore. Rumors said that the First Lord chased it around the labyrinth for a long time after all. But somehow, Sunny felt that the metal headband had nothing to do with the walking colossus. So many questions. How many champions were still around, anyway? Nephi's had not even tried to search for one tied to the builder, nor for one tied to the priestess. How many shard memories were already in the hands of humans? Among the members of the cohort, there were now 3, and they were about to challenge some abominable horror for a chance of receiving the 4th one. Why do I even assume that there are only 3? Sunny tilted his head. Indeed, the fact that he had only seen the Midnight Shard, the Zenith Shard, and the Dawn Shard did not mean that Changing Star had not gotten other ones already. Not counting the memory they were currently hunting, 3 more were unaccounted for. How many had she found already? He smiled darkly. Well, it's going to be revealed sooner or later. Right now, however, there is a more pressing issue. Glancing at Nephi's, he asked, "What happens if I get the memory? As you reminded so astutely, I am not one of your lackeys. That would throw a wrench in your plans, wouldn't it?" Sunny couldn't imagine changing Star, leaving something that important to chance. However, to his surprise, she just shrugged. "Keep it if you want." He frowned. Why was Nephi so nonchalant about the possibility of a shard memory falling into his hands? Wait, why was she so indifferent about him already possessing the Midnight Shard? One possible explanation was that it didn't matter who held the shard memory, as long as it was in human hands. The other explanation made Sunny very uncomfortable. Maybe she was just sure that fate would push the two in the same direction. If this was true, then it didn't really matter which one of them possessed the shards. He lingered for a bit, then shook his head and said, "Well, what are we waiting for? You didn't really expect any of us to stay behind while others fight, right? Let's go and hunt this monster." Honestly, while Sunny couldn't even imagine what type of terrible creature guarded the hidden statue, he was almost excited to find out. He wanted to see what the six of them were capable of under the miraculous effect of the Dawn Shard. Himself in particular. Eventually, they arrived at a vast cavern situated somewhere in the depths of the Draconian Mountains. The cavern was large enough to fit the entire bright castle, and the hill it stood upon, inside of it. Witnessing its size, Sunny got an inkling that there was a reason why these mountains were called hollow. As his sight pierced the darkness ruling over the vast cavern, Sunny couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe. The floor of it was covered by black sand, while its walls glistened like obsidian. In the center of the cavern stood a giant pillar of dark stone. It was surrounded by massive scaffolds, which nevertheless looked tiny and insignificant on its surface. The silhouette of an unfinished statue was easily discernible, cut from the giant pillar by the unknown sculptor. Its upper torso was almost finished, while the lower half was still encased inside the stone. It was as though a dark giant was struggling to free himself from the pillar of stone that imprisoned him. With a feeling of surprise, Sunny realized that he recognized the details of the unfinished giant's armor and shield. They were eerily similar to the armaments that the Black Knight guarding the ruined cathedral wore, and to the ones the stone saint wielded too. Looking up, he made sure that the head of the giant statue was missing. Of course it is. All of that only took a fraction of a second. Then Sunny hastily looked down, trying to notice the guardian of this obsidian cave before the creature noticed them. But it was too late. As soon as the members of the cohort entered the cavern, something moved in the darkness at the base of the statue, and then stepped forward. Sunny shivered. Damnation! Standing on the black sand, a monstrous creature that resembled a cross between a lion and a raven stretched its numerous limbs. Its body was pale as a corpse, while its head and chest were covered with dark feathers. It was massive in size, with muscles rolling like steel cables under the skin. The creature had 2 powerful hind legs and 6 more protruding messily from its wide chest, each ending with a set of deadly claws. But the most terrifying feature it possessed was a long, jagged black beak. It was a spire. Messenger! That was all Sunny had time to yell before the vile abomination lunged forward, exploding into a whirlwind of hunger, madness, and death. Sunny had already faced off against a spire messenger once. Back then, the vile creature had killed several experienced hunters in a span of just a few seconds, and the rest had only been spared this fate because of Effie's strength. That and the fact that the messenger had no need to fight them, and chose to retreat and search for easier prey. There was nowhere to retreat in this hidden cavern. Sunny didn't even know how the flying abomination had gotten here in the first place. However, he was not the same inexperienced kid he had been all those months ago, either. Sonny had grown considerably stronger. His arsenal of memories was better now. His skill and technique were far beyond what he had known in the past, and his kill count had crossed 100 nightmare creatures a long time ago. There was the Stone Saint, too. But most importantly, his memories were empowered by the Crown of Dawn. Theoretically, Sonny could stack 3 augmentations on the Midnight Shard, one from his shadow, one from the miraculous crown, and one from the blood blossom, as long as someone managed to make the messenger bleed. Hopefully, that would be enough to breach the gap between a dormant human and a fallen beast, and allow him to actually wound the abomination. Unlike the previous 2 times he had tried to cut into the flesh of similar horrors, Corpse Eater and the giant eel that had tried to hitch a ride on the ancient Colossus. But first he had to survive. Judging that the puppeteer's shroud had a decent chance of withstanding a blow from the messenger, thanks to the enhancement of the Dawn Shard, but also not even remotely willing to put that to the test, Sonny dove to the side. A moment later, the massive abomination collided against 2 shields, one belonging to Effie, the other to the Stone Saint. The terrible beak came down, aiming at the huntress. If it was before, the round shield that protected Effie from knee to shoulder would have been easily pierced and torn apart, as if it was made out of paper instead of metal. But due to the empowering aura that emanated from the Dawn Shard, it somehow held. The force of the impact, however, still threw both of them back. Even Shadow Saint, whose flesh was made of stone and weighed accordingly, was launched into the air like a doll made of feathers and rags. But they had bought the cohort the precious second to regroup and counterattack. As Kai and Cassie flew in different directions, creating some distance between them and the ferocious abomination, Nephi's and Castor attacked from the sides. One sword shined with brilliant white radiance, while the other gleamed with ghostly green light. However, the messenger was still terrifyingly formidable. The memories wielded by the cohort might have been enhanced, but their masters remained the same. They couldn't compete with a fallen creature in terms of raw power and speed. 2 of the beast's 6 front limbs swiped forward, deflecting the swords. 2 more shot at the attacking humans, forcing them to retreat while barely staying alive. Then the messenger twisted its neck and caught Kai in its sight. Its powerful black wings lashed down, creating a small hurricane that threw Nephi's and Castor aside. Using powerful hind legs to throw itself into the air, the abomination lunged at the retreating archer, who twisted his body in a desperate attempt to aim his bow. And then, suddenly, a triangular blade cut an arc around one of the legs and tied an invisible string around it. Grab! That was all Sonny had time to think before his hand was jerked forward with incredible force. However, this was exactly what he wanted. With the dark wing turning into a blur behind his back, Sonny used the momentum of the pull to turn his laughably slow levitation into real flight. In fact, he shot in the direction of the messenger, as though someone had launched him from a cannon. The Midnight Shard flashed through the air and bit into the abomination's flesh. Do it! Indeed, with both the Shadow and the Dawn Shard augmenting it, the stalwart blade was able to cut into the flesh of the fallen beast. Granted, it felt as though he was trying to cut stone. But it was enough. Sonny aimed at the base of the messenger's wing. With all the speed given to him by the combination of using the dark wing to levitate and the prowling thorn to create momentum, the blow Sonny had delivered was truly devastating. In fact, it was so forceful that every bone in his hand almost shattered. But he wasn't the one on the sharp end of the sword. The Midnight Shard cut deep into the wing of the vile abomination, sending rivers of blood streaming down its pale body. As soon as they did, the enchantment of the blood blossom awakened, making the blade even sharper. The elegant tack tore through the wing, crippling it. The messenger suddenly lost control of its flight and crashed back to the ground. "Eat dust, bastard." After a moment of glee, however, Sunny hurriedly dismissed the dark wing and plummeted down, landing on the sand some distance away from the monstrous beast. While gliding all the way back to the floor of the cavern would have been more comfortable, he wasn't going to become a sitting duck. Crippled wing or not, the messenger could still jump and use the other one. Maybe. At the same time as Sunny hit the ground and rolled, a menacing black arrow suddenly fell from above, piercing the second wing of the fearsome creature. There was no blood coming from the wound, though the arrow greedily drank it, preventing the blood blossom augmentation from growing a bit stronger. The abomination did not stagger and slowly turn into a mummy like the iron spiders had, however. It simply shook its body, causing the arrow to shatter and crumble into a stream of white sparks. But Sunny didn't see any of that. With his back to the messenger, he was already running toward the giant statue with all the speed he had. Sunny ran to the statue with every bit of speed he could manage, which was quite a considerable amount by human standards. No, even by those of other sleepers. As the wind whistled in his ears, the shadow flew off the blade of the midnight shard and turned around, observing the wounded abomination. Despite the fact that its wings were mangled, the messenger did not seem perturbed. On the contrary, it opened its terrible beak and let out a blood-curdling shriek, then lunged at the tiny humans with even more bestial fury. "I think it's not happy." Despite the mortal peril his companions found themselves in, Sunny did not stop to help them. Nephi's had said that the creature guarding the cave had to be killed by a person who had touched the ancient statue. Until someone did, this battle was nothing but a futile and stupidly dangerous game. The essence of combat was murder, after all. If no one truly aimed to kill the damn thing, how could they ever hope to survive? So Sunny was helping them after all, in a way. Behind him, things weren't going well for the cohort. The messenger was too big, too strong, too swift for a group of sleepers, no matter how talented. It was already a miracle that none of them had been torn to pieces already. But how long would that last? As the shadow watched, the terrifying beak came down again, and once again bounced off Effie's stalwart shield. However, this time, a wide crack appeared on the surface of the round shield. Before the huntress could even react, several powerful limbs shot at the cracked shield, each striking it with the force of a cannonball. Finally, the memory gave in and shattered, along with Effie's arm. Sunny saw fragments of bone piercing her olive skin as it twisted at an unnatural angle. "Damn faster." As the pillar of dark stone approached, he watched the messenger try to finish the wounded huntress off and be thwarted by the stone saint. Simultaneously, Nephi's managed to penetrate the barrier created by the creature's front limbs. Her sword flashed and bit into the pale flesh, leaving a deep gash on the abomination's side. Judging that he was far enough to not be afraid of a sudden attack aimed at his back, Sunny commanded the shadow to turn around and return to his side. His view of the battle immediately disappeared, and soon, the shadow caught up and wrapped itself around his body. Sunny's speed doubled. Pursued by the sounds of a ferocious battle, he neared the unfinished statue. However, before he could touch it, a human figure suddenly appeared in front of him in a blur and slid on the black sand, stopping right in front of the stone pillar. It was Castor. The proud legacy didn't look all too well. His shiny scale armor was torn by the claws of the terrible beast, leaving 4 deep wounds on his muscular chest. Blood was streaming from them, leaving the handsome young man pale and disheveled. No, it wasn't just that. Castor seemed a bit off, somehow. Sunny just couldn't tell what was wrong with him exactly. He did notice, however, a crystal amulet in the form of an hourglass hanging on a silver chain around his neck. "What is that? A charm memory? I didn't know that Castor had a charm." Not wasting any time, The legacy put his bloodied hand on the statue and closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't wearing one back on the marble arch, right? Opening his eyes a second later, Castor glanced at Sonny with a dark expression and turned into a blur once again, rushing back to rejoin the battle. Just as soon as he disappeared, Sonny crashed into the stone pillar, unceremoniously using it to stop his momentum. Bouncing off the hard surface, he rolled on the ground and shakily rose to his feet. "Og damn it, that hurt. That counted as touching the statue, right? Had to." Glancing back, Sonny saw another blood arrow piercing the flesh of the spire messenger and shattering a moment later. It wasn't destroyed, at least, just returned to Kai. Quiet Dancer was zipping around the massive abomination, aiming at its eyes. The elegant rapier was an echo, and as such did not enjoy the gift of the Dawn Shard, so it was more of a nuisance than a real threat to the beast. Still, it managed to deliver a couple of shallow cuts, causing the bastard to bleed. That was exactly what Sonny needed: blood, as much blood as possible. Launching himself forward, he held the midnight shard behind him and dashed toward the messenger. "Let's see which one of us can kill it first, Castor. Wouldn't it be funny if an outskirt rat like me got a third ascended memory, while a lofty legacy like you still had none?" Some distance away from his prey, Sonny commanded the stone saint to switch her battle style. The one the menacing shadow liked to use the most, or simply saw as most suited to her equipment and the situation, was deliberate, elegant, and steady. But that wasn't what Sonny needed right now. What he needed was carnage, savagery, and bloody mayhem. Lingering for a fraction of a second, the stone saint suddenly threw her shield away, grasped her sword with both hands, and lunged forward. Any sort of grace she had possessed earlier was now gone. Instead of a noble knight, the shadow now appeared as a barbarous butcher. It seemed as though she cared neither about self-preservation nor about protecting the members of the cohort anymore. She didn't even care about killing the enemy that much. All she aimed to do was inflict the maximum amount of pain, the maximum amount of damage, and most importantly, the maximum amount of bleeding. Just like Sonny had commanded her to do. As he ran back, more and more small but heavily bleeding wounds appeared on the messenger's massive frame. Its pale body was now half covered in dark blood. Castor's enchanted sword added one or two, but most came from the berserk shadow and changing star. Effie was still in the fight as well. Despite the fact that her arm was severely broken and there was bloody foam on her lips, the beautiful spear broke through the abomination's defenses and left a bloody mark on its skin, too. But none of these attacks were powerful enough to end the creature once and for all. Already nearing the scene of the massacre, Sonny willed his shadow to flow onto the midnight shard. The power of the Dawn Shard was burning inside of it, making the stalwart blade sing. And on top of it all, the vile blood blossom was filling it with insatiable bloodlust and hunger. Without slowing down, Sonny lunged at the spire messenger and fell on his back. As momentum pushed him forward, he slid on the black sand and thrust the midnight shard upward. Piercing the abdomen of the terrible creature, the razor-sharp sword easily cut through skin and muscle, gutting the abomination and causing it to stagger and fall. Indeed, with so much blood streaming down the messenger's pale body, the savage augmentation of the blood blossom had grown vastly more powerful. If before Sonny had felt as though he was cutting stone, now the midnight shard sliced through the tough flesh of the abomination with just a moderate amount of trouble. Of course, the fact that it was aimed at the soft belly of the monster instead of the adamantine black feather also played its part. The takai cut through the pale skin and muscle tissue, tearing its abdomen open. As blood, guts, and viscera fell from the terrible wound, Sonny slid from under the massive creature, just in time to avoid being crushed under its weight. Even then, however, the messenger was not yet dead. What curses! Lying on his back in an awkward position, Sonny was momentarily left defenseless. He had hoped that his strike would if not kill the monstrous abomination outright, then at least leave it stunned for a few seconds, giving him time to disengage and get away to a safe distance. But the creature seemed to be impervious to pain and the fear of death that all living beings felt. Despite receiving a mortal wound, it only became more ferocious. Staggered by the unexpected attack, the messenger lost balance and fell to the ground. Its head hit the black sand, sending a cloud of it into the air. Then its round corvine eye locked onto Sonny and flushed with eerie madness. Knowing that he was not going to be fast enough, Sonny desperately tried to roll away. But it was too late. The terrifying jagged beak shot in his direction, threatening to impale him through the chest. Damn it, eh? However, at the last moment, a human figure in an elegant black and white armor suddenly appeared between him and the abhorrent beast. The incandescent sword lashed out, pushing the beak slightly to the side. As the result, the messenger failed to kill Sonny. Instead, the beak pierced the Starlight Legion armor and tore through Changing Star's shoulder, almost severing her left arm. Nephis was thrown aside in a rain of blood, while the abomination opened its mouth and let out another deafening shriek. For a moment time slowed. Sonny, who had just rose to one knee, noticed a sword surrounded by ghostly green lights approaching the messenger's neck. Castor was seconds away from finishing the cursed creature off. But before he got the chance, a heavy triangular dagger flashed in the air and sunk into the creature's eye, penetrating through it deep enough to reach the brain. The messenger froze. Its ugly raven-like head swayed slightly. The beak fell open, revealing rows of sharp teeth and a long, wet, crimson tongue. Looking at the monster with a dark expression, Sonny pulled on the string of the prowling thorn, wreaking havoc inside its skull. The kunai tore through the round black eye on the way back, flying into the air in a stream of blood, bone, and chunks of brain matter. Finally, the creature convulsed and crashed onto the ground. Its eyes dimmed, then glossed over. The corner of Sonny's mouth curled upward. "You have slain a fallen monster, cursed herald. Your shadow grows stronger. Come on. You have received a memory." A triumphant gleam appeared in his dark eyes. The cohort was in a pathetic state. Effie had the bones in her arm shattered into tiny pieces, with sharp splinters tearing through her skin. Her ribs and lungs were wounded, too. Castor was bleeding heavily from the 4 gashes left on his torso by the messenger's claws. Kai lost too much blood to the blood arrow and was now on the verge of fainting. Neff's left arm was partially severed and barely attached to her body. The sight of it was ghastly. Even the stone saint was severely damaged. Only Sonny and Cassie were more or less in one piece. It was all worth it, though. The spire messenger was actually dead while they were not. Lying on the black sand, Effie suddenly laughed. Sonny gave her a strange look. "Have you lost your mind? What are you laughing at?" The huntress shrugged, then grimaced from pain. "Oh, it's just, I was thinking whether we are legendary heroes now or just, fools of legendary proportions. All of us in the outer settlement, the castle too, I guess, heard the stories about the incredible exploits of the first cohort hundreds of times. Killing a spire messenger who made its nest in the throne room and all that. But I never once thought that I would actually do something that impossible as well." She grew silent and then added, "It's weird." Sonny sort of understood her feelings. However, he wasn't going to admit it. He didn't want his name to ever appear in the same sentence as the word hero. After everything he had experienced, Sonny had become allergic to it. He sighed. "You do know how one becomes a mythical hero, right? It's really easy, you just have to do something outlandish and then die. The death part is the key, actually. So I would rather not be a hero ever." With that, he stood up and tiredly dismissed his battle memories and the stone saint. Since only Cassie and he were unscathed, It fell to them to help everyone treat their wounds. Well, in this case, they just had to make sure that no one died before Neff summoned her flames and healed everyone. Sunny wasn't sure that she'll be able to remain conscious after that, though. Walking over to their leader, he sat down, looked at her, and then asked, "Are you stupid? Why did you do that?" She glanced at him with her usual indifferent expression, straightened her back, and said, "What do you mean?" Sunny sighed. "Why did you get between me and the messenger? Look at the state you're in." She looked at him, then shrugged with one shoulder. "I can heal myself, remember, you can't." He shook his head. "I also remember that my armor is 3 whole tiers above yours. Chances are, I wouldn't even be wounded that terribly." Nephis was silent for a bit. Then she simply said, "Too risky." Sunny couldn't help but laugh. "Gods, I just don't get you. I really don't. You are so morbidly cunning sometimes, but other times you are so stupidly naive. It doesn't make any sense." Changing Star did not respond for a long time and just stared at him. When she responded, her tone was as flat as usual. "Right back at you." Sometime later, Sunny found the time to dive into the Soul Sea and take a look at the new memory he had gotten. It was a heavy round shield forged from dull, lusterless dark steel. Inside of it, visible only to him, a complex weave of ethereal strings shone with stark radiance. Memory Dusk Shard. Memory Rank Ascended. Memory Tier II. Memory Type Weapon. Memory Description. Forged from a shard of a fallen star, this shield contains the weight of the heavens. Depending on the heart of its wielder, it can be light as a feather or heavy as regret. Memory Enchantments. Indomitable. Enchantment Description. Following the will of its master, the Dusk Shard can change its weight. Sunny frowned. This enchantment, at first glance, it seemed very unassuming. People usually thought about the weight of their weapons only when they considered how much endurance they would need to wield them. In that regard, the lighter the weapon was, the better. A light weapon could allow a person to fight longer without growing tired, which often meant the difference between victory and defeat. However, things changed when it came to the Awakened, who often possessed inhuman strength and endurance. Light weapons had their role to play, but more often than not, what you really needed was force. And the more mass something had, the more force it could produce. In the past, Sunny had only considered shields as a defensive tool. But after watching Effie and Stone Saint use them in battle, he realized that in the hands of a trained warrior, a shield could be as destructive and deadly as a sword. Sometimes much more so. Just imagining Effie bashing someone with a shield that weighed a few 100 kilograms sent shivers running down his spine. Not to mention that the weight could be changed on the fly, making it light to maneuver faster, then turning it into an improvised siege ram at the right moment. But even in terms of pure defense, a shield that could be turned into a literal wall was priceless. He could see a monster such as the Spire Messenger colliding with it, and simply bouncing off in the chorus of shattering bones. A maybe. Granted, Sunny never trained with a shield, and the sword he used demanded 2 hands to be wielded properly. But where there was a will, there would be a way. With a slight smile, Sunny summoned the Dusk Shard. The sparks of light appeared in a whirlwind around his arm. A few long seconds later, the silhouette of a large round shield weaved itself into reality. After a few more seconds, and the memory was fully formed. "How nigh, oh crap!" With a surprised yelp, Sunny staggered and toppled over. Luckily, he fell on top of the dull iron shield, otherwise he might have been crushed under its weight. "This is so heavy." The damn thing was heavier than he had ever expected. In fact, it was probably too heavy for him to even lift, let alone carry around. The members of the cohort glanced at Sunny, who was struggling to stand up, with perplexed expressions. Gritting his teeth, Sunny rose to one knee and awkwardly tried to lift the shield off the ground. However, no matter how hard he tried, he only managed to drag it by a few centimeters. Curses! All right, I admit it, it's too damn heavy. Let's reduce the weight a little. But a few seconds later, his face froze. This can't be, no way. However, the truth was hard to deny. He couldn't change the dusk shard's weight at all. The enchantment that was supposed to allow Sunny to do that was there, but it required him to actively manipulate the soul essence, shadow essence in his case, to access it. The most powerful enchantments were all like that, and the higher a memory rank, the more probable it was for the enchantments it possessed to be really powerful. The problem was that sleepers had no way to control and manipulate their soul essence. Sunny didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What were the chances of him coming to possess not one, not two, but three whole ascended memories, only to find out that two of them were completely unusable, while the third one required him to somehow become a master marksman to avoid dying from blood loss? Damn it all, but especially damn that damned fated attribute. While Sunny was grinding his teeth in outrage, Effie approached him and glanced down from her considerable height. Then she leaned forward, took the dusk shard by the rim and lifted it, along with Sunny, from the ground, seemingly without too much strain. That's it then, the memory you got from the pale bastard. Finally standing up with the help of the huntress, he stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he suddenly smiled. Yes, by the way, Effie, we're friends, aren't we? See, I couldn't help but notice that your shield memory was destroyed in that last fight. How about? She rolled her eyes. Wait, don't tell me. Sunny's shady emporium is open for business again. He blinked a couple of times, then grinned. Why yes, how did you know? The huntress glanced down at the heavy shield, squinted, and said in a cautious tone, Well, what do you want in exchange? Sunny thought for a bit. That bottomless bag of yours, and two other awakened memories. Before Effie could come to a decision, though, Nephi's interrupted their conversation. Coming closer, she glanced at the huntress first, then at Sunny, and finally at the shield. Finally, she asked, How about giving it to Effie in exchange for another ascended memory, one more suited to your technique? Sunny dismissed the dusk shard and hesitated for a bit, looking at Changing Star with doubt. Was this her ploy to get the shard memory from him? If she had an ascended memory all this time, why had she been hiding it? And where could she have gotten one to begin with? After a while, he said, I don't know, show me the memory and then we'll decide. Nephi silently stepped closer and took his hand. Then, a spark of energy traveled from her body to his. The spell whispered, You have received a memory. Throwing a dubious glance at Nephi's, Sunny summoned the runes and found the name of the memory he had received. His shadow tilted its head, surprised. Shimmering in the air in front of him, a string of runes read, Memory Moonlight Shard, another shard memory. Sunny raised an eyebrow, glanced at Nephi's and turned back to the runes. His eyes glistened. Memory Moonlight Shard. Memory rank ascended. Memory tier, I. Memory type, weapon. Memory description. When the stars were extinguished and fell, a lonely moon remained in the empty sky. With no sun to shine upon it, the moon grew dim, withered, and died. As the last remnants of moonlight were devoured by darkness, one small shard was forged into this subtle blade. Memory enchantments, unseen. Enchantment description. Forged from moonlight, this blade appears in the hand of its wielder without delay. Sunny's pupils widened slightly. With a tense frown, he summoned the moonlight shard. A graceful dagger with a long and slender blade appeared in his hand. It tapered to a needle-like point and had a simple cross guard, with a handle made from glossy black wood. The most striking feature of the dagger was that it seemed to be forged out of clear, misty glass. That glass, however, appeared to be as strong as steel and much, much sharper. In the darkness of the underground cavern, the ghostly stiletto was nearly invisible. What really stunned Sonny, though, was not its look or its rank, but the fact that the moonlight blade had appeared in his had instantaneously. There had been no sparks of light, no process of weaving itself into existence from nothingness. The dagger was simply suddenly there, as if it had always been that way. This was an incredible enchantment. It might not have seemed that powerful, but Sonny instantly understood that there was a lot more to this simple trait than most people would assume. Once summoned, memories took time to form. The dusk shard had weaved itself into existence in about 6 to 8 seconds. But even if it was just a single second, like the time it took Neff's silver sword to appear, the process was still not instantaneous. What's more, the appearance of a memory was telegraphed in advance by the dancing sparks of light. In short, it was very hard to take the enemy by surprise by suddenly summoning a memory. A skilled opponent would always have enough time to notice it and react accordingly, unless they were lured into a cunning trap by a sword savant like Changing Star. But even then, it wasn't easy to plan and execute such a move. Yet all of that didn't apply to the Moonlight Shard. The slender blade of the ghostly dagger could appear out of nowhere in an instant and immediately strike at the target. What an insidious little thing! It was uniquely suited to Sonny's preferred method of engaging the enemy, indeed. He liked to strike from the shadows and kill with one strike. With the ghostly blade in his arsenal, though, he would not even have to hide in the darkness in order to deliver an unexpected and deadly blow. No one would see it coming. Not to mention that it was an ascended memory. Armed with the Moonlight Shard, Sonny would finally be able to wound and kill fallen creatures, even without the miraculous enhancement of the Crown of Dawn. His own shadow would be more than enough. Granted, he would have to get really close and personal to a monster in order to use the dagger, but still, at least with it, he stood a chance. Suppressing a satisfied smile from appearing on his lips, Sonny turned to Nephi's and asked in an incredulous tone, "Where did you get this thing?" She lingered for a few moments, then said, "North of the Dark City." Sonny nodded. That made sense. There was another red cross on her map, about a week's worth of traveling time north of the ruins. It was drawn near a symbol resembling a grotesque, misshapen skull. Changing Star had indeed been busy in the 3 months that he had spent hunting monsters on the dark streets of the cursed city. Now 5 of the shard memories were accounted for: Dawn Shard, Zenith Shard, Dusk Shard, Midnight Shard, and Moonlight Shard. Only 2 remained. Sonny wondered which statue they were tied to, and whether someone out there already held them in their hands. It didn't matter that much for now, though. With a sigh, he dismissed the ghostly dagger and said, "I have to warn you that the enchantment on that shield requires an awakened to activate it. It is supposed to be able to change its weight and mass freely, but actually, it's just stuck being stupidly heavy." Nephi's glanced at Effie, who just shrugged. "I'm fine with it as is." Sonny finally allowed himself to smile. "Ah, that's great then, we have a deal." In the end, they had to spend a couple of days in the vast underground cavern. Nephi's had to recover from her ghastly wound and the strain of healing the rest of the cohort, while all of them had not liked the idea of venturing back into the mist with their memories damaged. Eventually, though, they were ready to head back. Sonny used this short moment of respite to rest and practice shadow dance, slowly moving toward his goal of mastering its first step. He knew that there was nothing but bloodshed ahead of them. First, they would have to fight their way through the untold horrors of the labyrinth, and once they reached the Dark City, the last act of this messed-up play would begin. Looking back, he couldn't believe how far he had come in these past 8 months. When Sonny arrived on the Forgotten Shore, he was weak and inexperienced. His first fight against a single carapace scavenger almost cost him his life. And now, here he was, standing near the corpse of a fallen monster he had killed with his own 2 hands. From barely killing a single carapace scavenger, to almost losing his life in a fight against a carapace centurion, to summoning a horror of the depths and finishing off the carapace demon. From entering the dark city, not knowing anything about it, to hunting down dozens of nightmare creatures on its cursed streets, to fighting against a horde of undead monsters in the catacombs beneath it. From venturing back into the labyrinth of his own free will and waging war against the tribe of monstrous spiders, to riding on the shoulder of an ancient giant and battling fallen abominations and hordes of awakened creatures. From finding a nameless grave in the foothills of the Hollow Mountains to witnessing the last resting place of the First Lord in their depths. He had lived through so much, endured so much, and accomplished so much. Of course, there had not been only victories. He had tasted defeat, too, a lot of it, both in battle and in his tentative attempts to build human relationships with other prisoners of this desolate hell. He had experienced pain, sorrow, and despair, and he was going to taste even more of it soon. Turning his head slightly, Sonny looked at his companions. Nephi's, Cassie, Kai, Effie, and Castor were busy with final preparations for their long return journey. How many of them would be alive by the end of all of this? Closing his eyes, he sighed. It was not going to be easy to survive the finale. But Sonny was determined to show the rest of the world what he was really made of. He was going to win. He was going to be the last one standing. No matter what he had to do. Even if doing it would break him. 3 months later, a group of 6 battered humans appeared from the sea of crimson coral and approached a magnificent white arch. Moving with the precision of experienced predators, they swiftly slaughtered a few transient creatures that hid in the deep shadow cast by the ancient structure, stripped them down for meat, and swiftly climbed up. Against all odds, the cohort had survived the journey back to the dark city. If only barely. Looking north from the top of the marble arch, Sonny saw the distant gray wall. His gaze lingered on it, full of exhaustion, triumph, and dark apprehension. Finally, they had returned. The past 3 months had been an endless bloody nightmare, with countless horrors and battles leaving their marks on him. And yet, they had also been an anvil against which he was tested, tempered, and made stronger as the result. Sonny didn't have a mirror, but was sure that his appearance changed a lot. He could tell just by looking at other members of the cohort. Changing Star's white armor was now covered by numerous scratches and tears that even the restorative effect of the Soul Sea couldn't heal. Her silver hair was longer, reaching to the middle of her back. The ivory face of their leader had grown thin, with dark circles visible under her striking, burning gray eyes. Castor changed even more. The neat and dignified young scion was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a man with disheveled hair and a short, scruffy beard stood in his place, his face dark and grim. Sometimes, Sonny thought that he could even see a gray hair or 2 in his luscious mane. Kai was still beautiful and elegant, but most of his charm was hidden under layers and layers of dirt, dust, and dried blood. The stylish armor he had worn was now long gone, destroyed in one of the vicious battles they had fought, and replaced by a rather unflattering garment that seemed to be woven out of bluish seaweed. The archer also wielded a new bow, this one long and powerful, fashioned out of 2 curved horns that had belonged to a creature that Sonny would rather not think about. Suffice it to say, this memory was of the 5th tier and truly deadly. Effie was much the same, except for the fact that she had become even leaner, her robust musculature not covered even by a gram of fat. The huntress wielded 2 shard memories, both responsible for sending dozens upon dozens of nightmare creatures to their deaths. Her archaic bronze armor was dented all over, but somehow still held together. Cassie was the youngest of them, so the changes that had happened to her were perhaps the most pronounced. By now, she had lost most of her childish softness and had turned into a beautiful young woman that looked to be on the cusp of adulthood. She had 3 echoes tied to her core now, one given to her by Nephi's, the other one by Kai. With the help of her echoes and the dark wing, Cassie was now able to move and participate in battles almost as if she was not blind. Almost. And then there was Sonny himself. He was perhaps even more beaten and battered than the rest of them, the puppeteer's shroud almost coming apart at the seams. His hair was long, messy, and in desperate need of a good wash. Sadly, his skin was still as pale as that of a corpse. He was also unable to grow even a bit of scruff, let alone a real beard. But oh well, why care about the little things? Summoning the runes, Sonny found a particular cluster and glanced at it. The runes shimmered in the twilight of the approaching night. Shadow fragments, 938/1000. A dark smile appeared on his lips. Almost. In the past 3 months, Sonny had participated in countless battles. His main responsibility was that of a scout, and as such, he was not a part of the cohort's main strike force. But even then, he had faced and slain more than 100 nightmare creatures. Closer to 200, in fact. Among them were beasts, monsters, as well as a few demons and even a devil or two. Sonny absorbed the remnants of their shadows and used his share of the soul shards to trade for memories with other members of the cohort, which he then fed to the stone saint. And now he was so close to reaching full saturation of his shadow core. His prowess and physique were considerably enhanced, too. Somewhere along the way, Sonny had crossed the line of humanly possible and was now firmly in the realm of inhuman ability. He was faster, stronger, and more enduring than any mundane human could ever hope to be. His shadow had grown much more potent, too, since its enhancement increased proportionally to his own power. Or was it the other way around? In any case, Sonny felt that when the shadow was wrapped around his body, he was now almost at the level of an actual awakened. Very few sleepers on the Forgotten Shore could challenge him in terms of raw power. Of course, all of them had deadly aspect abilities of their own. And several of the most deadly sleepers among them were all right here, with him, setting up camp and getting ready to cook him food. Sonny wasn't sure, but guessed that Effie and Castor had already fully saturated their soul cores, beating him to it. The huntress because of the years she had spent hunting monsters on the streets of the Dark City, and the legacy because of the soul shards his clan must have provided him before his first journey into the dream realm. Nephi's, Sonny wasn't sure. Logic dictated that she should have reached the point of saturation before Sonny did, but he still saw her absorbing shards after each battle. So either she did not, or her aspect had other uses for the excess soul essence. Or she was just putting on an expensive show. Kai and Cassie were behind him in terms of the amount of accumulated essence, but not by much. Each of them was now a powerhouse, just like the rest of the cohort. Looking at the people busying themselves with mundane tasks of setting up the camp, Sonny inhaled deeply and smiled. Ah, aren't we a sight to behold? They truly were. When leaving the Dark City behind, Sonny had known how powerful the members of the cohort were. However, he had not quite realized just how well-rounded and perfectly suited to face various challenges presented by the labyrinth their group was. With Nephi's, Effie and Castor leading the charge, most nightmare creatures populating the forest of crimson coral had little chance to survive, not with the crown of dawn pouring raw power into the armor and weapons of the cohort, at least. Each of the 3 was a deadly and versatile fighter, with their own unique approach to combat and strengths that complemented each other. With the 3 slayers holding off the opponents while being supported by Kai from above, very few things could stand in their way. Night himself had turned out to be an astonishingly deadly presence on the battlefield, as well, with the blood arrow providing him with a conditionally endless supply of arrows. He could just stay in the air, out of reach of the abominations that had no way to attack at range, which was most of them, and pick them out with well-aimed shots. With the addition of the formidable horn bow, the distance at which he could hit the target had increased tremendously, allowing him to eliminate some of the enemies long before they had gotten close enough to the cohort for an effective attack. His opening salvo had made a lot of battles much less problematic. Of course, Kai couldn't fly above the labyrinth with impunity. The gray sky was full of danger too, and by separating himself from his companions, he risked being attacked and torn apart by the abominations that populated it. He had to maintain a fragile balance. But the flying nightmare creatures were a threat to the cohort regardless of whether or not the charming archer rose into the air or not. Actually, this was the type of enemy they were equipped to fight the least. That's why Kai's ability to fly had turned out to be priceless. Especially because he was usually able to fly faster, or at least maneuver better than most of the creatures that dwelled in the sky. More than once, they had survived only because the archer was able to draw the fury of the aerial abominations and dodge their attack long enough to either fell them with a perfectly aimed arrow or give his companions a chance to join the fight. Sunny and Cassie usually protected the rear of the cohort to prevent anything from attacking their companions from the back, which happened more often than one would hope. With the help of the Stone Saint and the Quiet Dancer, and later the other two echoes belonging to the blind girl, they were able to hold off anything until the main force was done with their share of the opponents and joined the fray. That was not to say that their role in the cohort was less important. If anything, Sunny was convinced that what they did was more vital to the survival of each member of the cohort than what the fighters were doing. It was true that, with the help of the Dawn Shard, the cohort was well equipped to handle most monsters of the labyrinth. What they truly had to fear were the creatures that defied all logic, the perils that the human mind could not even comprehend, and the labyrinth itself, as well as the dark waters of the cursed sea and the ancient horrors that dwelled beneath them. That was what Sunny and Cassie had to protect the group from. As Sunny absorbed more and more shadow fragments, the range at which he could control his shadow grew exponentially. By now, the shadow could move almost as far as a whole kilometer ahead of the cohort, scouting for any potential threat and giving them plenty of time to decide if they wanted to fight or change course and avoid the danger entirely. If anything, it had become a little feral and now preferred to wander around aimlessly and far away, returning to Sunny only when specifically commanded to do so. But regardless of that, the value of being able to see and identify their enemies in advance was impossible to overestimate. It was just too valuable. In battle, the tiniest advantage could decide the difference between life and death, and the advantages of knowledge and the first strike were possibly the most important. However, there were things on the Forgotten Shore that even Sunny could not see, predict, or escape from. That was where Cassie's affinity to revelations and miraculous intuition came into play. She was responsible for preventing the cohort from stumbling into anything that would destroy their very souls before anyone could even understand what was happening, or something that simply could not be defeated. If not for Cassie, a sudden storm or a creature akin to the Soul Devourer, or something even more terrifying, would have ended their lives long before they returned back to the Dark City. But even with all that, every day in the labyrinth brought them to the very verge of death. No matter how strong, well-rounded, and well-equipped the cohort was, the nightmares of the Forgotten Shore were always more powerful, unpredictable, and bizarre, making any and all preparations useless. In the end, the only reason that none of them had died from grievous wounds, sickness, or infection was because of changing stars' healing flames. In the 3 months that they had spent traveling through the labyrinth, Sunny fully understood why healers were so sought after among the awakened. He knew it before, in theory, But only after being subjected to the daily terror of their journey had he realized how life-changing, literally, the presence of a healer in the cohort truly was. And so, just like that, they had done the unthinkable and managed to travel all the way from the edges of the forgotten shore back to its center. Thanks to their power and resolve, their foresight, their strength, and their ability to rely on and help each other, as well as in large part pure dumb luck. And now that they were about to return to the cursed haven of the Dark City, their luck was about to be tested as it had never been tested before. But that was for later. First, the members of the cohort had to fulfill their obligation to Sunny. He had joined this expedition on a certain condition, after all. Glancing once again at the distant gray wall, Sunny clenched his fists, the corner of his mouth curled up in a vicious grin. Wait a bit more, bastard. Your day of reckoning is coming. In 2 days they were going to kill the Black Knight. Turning away from the distant wall of the Dark City, Sunny closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and let go of his anger. He had to keep his head cool for now. Killing a fallen devil was not going to be an easy task. It might even turn out to be his undoing. But he was determined to see it done. The debt of blood he owed that creature had to be repaid, no matter what. Walking over to the fire, Sunny sat down and tried to remember the details of their previous stay on this old, weathered marble arch. What a fun couple of days that had been. Rather pleasing on the eye, too. His shadow shook its head dejectedly and turned away. Soon, Nephise handed him his share of the food. Her culinary skills had improved a lot during these months, despite the fact that there had not been a large variety of ingredients at their disposal. Still, being able to turn the most repulsive of monsters into a delicious meal was something that not everyone was capable of. This should be a separate course at the academy. Teacher Julius had taught him how to consume various things in the dream realm without ending up poisoned to death, but he had neglected to go in depth on how to actually make them taste good. Sinking his teeth into a juicy piece of meat, Sunny forgot about his troubles for a bit and simply enjoyed this rare moment of bliss. Disposing of the meat, he smiled in satisfaction and wiped his hands on the soft fabric of the puppeteer's shroud. Then, he glanced at Nephise and asked, "We should be able to reach the city tomorrow, yes?" She gave him a nod. "If nothing happens." Sunny thought for a bit, then said in a curious tone, "Do you think Gunlog knows that we are coming back?" Nephise thought for a few moments before replying. Her voice was calm and indifferent. "Definitely." Sunny sighed. This was his conclusion as well. Back when he had first entered the Bright Castle, he had learned from Castor about a certain artisan that could track the general location of anyone a person had ever met. This was how Castor knew how many sleepers of their crop had been sent to the Forgotten Shore. Even if Gunlog possessed no other method to learn of their approach, all he had to do was ask that woman. Sunny shifted a little and asked, "Should we expect a welcoming party?" Changing Star shook her head. "I don't think so. There's no need for him to do anything. Gunlog knows that we will come to him of our own free will, simply because there's nowhere else for us to go." She fell silent for a while and then added, "But most of all, this has never been about killing me or my people. It was always about destroying the ideas I represent. What's the point of crushing me if no one is there to see it? Gunlog won't do anything without an audience. He had sent Horus to stop us from escaping the stage, but now that we are back on it, there is no need for him to rush the inevitable." Everyone listened to the conversation with dark expressions. Sunny glanced at them, hesitated for a bit, and asked, "Are you confident that you can defeat him?" Nephise stared at the fire. After a while, she simply said, "Yes." Hearing that, Sunny smiled sweetly. "Well, good for you, but I am not. So let's finish our deal before the lot of you get killed by that maniac. All right." A corner of Neff's mouth curled upward. You are talking about the fallen devil. He nodded. Yes, the bastard. You promised to help me kill him, remember? Meanwhile, Kai was looking at him with a complicated expression. Finally, not able to hold back, he asked, Sonny, are you really not going to join us? Don't you see that we only have one chance to escape this place, not to mention all the lives we can save? Sonny shrugged. To be honest, he wasn't entirely sure on that point himself. On one hand, he had no desire of helping Nephi's achieve her insane goal. On the other hand, things that she had set in motion were going to happen with or without him. What was he going to do? Hide in his cathedral and wait until there was no one else left alive on the forgotten shore? Some fate that would be. Maybe I'll join you and maybe I won't. Who knows what will happen? He fell silent and cast a sideways glance at Cassie. Actually, at least 3 people here knew what would happen, more or less. It's hard to escape fate. That's not the point, though, is it? The point is that you should conclude our deal first and do whatever it is you wish to do later. Changing Star faced the 2 of them and calmly ended that conversation. Sure, no problem. We'll go to the cathedral first. A deal is a deal after all. Sonny smiled with satisfaction. Nephi's glanced at him and added, But Sonny, how exactly are we supposed to kill a fallen devil? His smile widened. Oh, I'm glad that you asked. Sonny had been making plans on how exactly to kill the Black Knight for more than half a year now. Prior to leaving the Dark City, he had spent 2 entire months observing the terrifying fiend and trying to learn everything there was to know about him. Needless to say, the task of slaying a creature that powerful was not going to be trivial. In fact, it was going to be the hardest battle they had fought yet. It almost seemed impossible. But was it really? The fight against the Spire Messenger, who had turned out to be a fallen monster, nearly cost several members of the cohort their lives. They had barely been able to hold off against the creature of its class, and a devil was 10 times more dreadful. However, there was a big difference between the messenger they had faced and the Black Knight. That difference was, basically, very simple. It was that Sonny did not hate the messenger with all his dark, vindictive heart. And now, that hate was going to tip the scales in their favor. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.